All yours, Bruce.
Okay. Well, welcome to School for A Course in Miracles. And as always, thanks to Tim Wise and Lynn Corona for providing this wonderful forum for us to share stuff about the course. And I'm Bruce Ralston. Today we will talk about Ken's chart. And I got a whole bunch of graphics, so hopefully it won't be too overwhelming, but I'll try to focus on a few key ideas in the course. Keep it to the basics, and but the basics really cover everything, don't they? No. So some years ago, I ran across Ken's wonderful chart, which Tim has a simplified version of behind him, and I actually saw that and was inspired to make yet another version of it, which will be one of the slides I'll show. So just real quickly, let me go to desktop. Why am I not seeing the other? Let's see. I need to see where the other screens are. Let's see if I can figure that out. Okay. I see them here. Not seeing them in my share. Let's try it again. Let's try do a share screen. So, oh, there we go. Now they're. I would have had a lot of graphics that didn't happen, but now it's loaded. Fine. So anyway, I'm just going to very briefly show Ken's chart. Can everybody see that? Okay. This is what I think of as his kind of his master chart, and there's really kind of three sections there. There's all the stuff in purple, which is all the pure non-dual stuff, the heaven knowledge section, and then the middle section is really the mind, and then below that is form or physicality. And what I did a while back is I took the middle section and I thought, well, what are some of the attributes of the ego, and what are some of the attributes of the Holy Spirit? And then so I took that, and I'm not going to go everything in Ken's chart because there's a lot there. But I thought, it'd be kind of nice to be able to zoom in and out. But before we do that, let me just preface. Actually, let me just stop the share for the moment. Let me preface the whole conversation with the idea that, and Ken would be one of the first to suggest that this is a very Platonic course, meaning words are, but symbols of symbols, and charts and graphics are also symbols of symbols too. So any kind of a pictorial representation is necessarily inadequate, but we use a dualistic language and we use dualistic symbols. And so there's the caveat or the disclaimer. It's like, charts are cool, but the whole idea is to understand the ideas behind them, and more importantly, ask Holy Spirit for help in understanding the ideas behind them, and probably even more importantly, applying them. And we're all working on that together, aren't we? So,
and Plato, I mean, Platonic as in Plato, not as in platonic relationships.
Exactly. Thank you for that, Tim.
I didn't want to scare anybody off.
No. It's nothing about that sort of thing. It's basically Plato's philosophy was that, there's a reality that's more real than the symbol. And the course would suggest that we're all symbols here. Every seemingly separate self, or silly seemingly separate self, as I like to say, is a symbol. That's some pretty good alliteration, right? So anyway, so with that firmly in place, just so we don't do the level of confusion thing, and assume that a chart could be a substitute for the ideas behind it, I'll go back to another screen share here, and let's go to what I did with that red and green section in Ken's chart. Is I made a little comparison, and I'm not going to go through everything in this either, because I could easily spend a whole hour doing that. And we've done that in a previous class, and I'll put the link to that in a post that I'll make from this. But I just kind of went through. I'll just read the first couple of lines here. So in Ken's chart, he has the ego on the left, and with red lettering, and the Holy Spirit on the right with green lettering. I actually made this around Christmas time and didn't realize these were Christmas colors. Silly aside, but again, the colors are arbitrary, the fonts are arbitrary, the words even are arbitrary. But the idea is that at some point we realize that the craziness of the ego thought system, whatever you want to call it, is that it's completely insane, and 24/7, 365. It really it's totally nuts and off the wall crazy, off the chart crazy. And the Holy Spirit is always 100% sane. So just for starters, the ego's identity is separate, finite, temporary, valueless, and always based on some kind of dualistic thinking, a we-they thinking. Holy Spirit's capital I identity, by contrast, is shared, it's infinite, it's permanent, it's invaluable, and it's non-dual. There's no polarization involved. And then the next one, the ego says that we're a dream figure. It wants us to identify with the projection that we've made into the world from our mind, and tells us that ideas can leave their source. It's mindless, oblivious, self-absorbed, and it's very exclusive. It wants to think that it's special. And the Holy Spirit says, no, actually, you're not the dream figure, you're the dreamer. And you can observe the dream without judgment and being mindful and inclusive. And that inclusive forgiveness and inclusive identification is then what helps us be truly compassionate to ourselves and each other. So now I'm going to jump from there without spending the rest of the time going through all those other things. I'm going to go to another iteration. Hopefully this won't make you too dizzy. This is another version. Let's see. Let me make sure I can see it now. And let's put that away and that away, and go to right here. Okay, so here's another version of a chart. This now, rather than focusing on the middle section, this is kind of a more similar to what Ken had done in some ways. And I thought, well, let's put some of the jargon he had in the upper third there, the upper portion for heaven: God, pure non-duality, Christ, all-inclusive self, ineffable spirit, love, truth, perfection, changeless creation. This is really beyond the scope of the course. As Ken points out in so many of his talks, the course isn't a course in love. It's not a course in perfection. It's not a course in truth, because that's really our true nature. So it really is about removing the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, removing the blocks to the awareness of the truth in our mind, and so forth. So all those words, again, you can swap them out. But the idea being that anything that doesn't change is our real nature. But because we made up a changeable dream, that's the emphasis of the course. So that brings us down to the middle section here, which is the mind. And that's where the cause is. So if you kind of follow this across from left to right, the cause is the split mind from the ego. But how do we get to there first? Well, we got there because of this little blue dot right in the middle. And the course says, as we're probably all familiar, at least if you've looked at the course for more than a few moments, you probably have run across the famous quote, into eternity where all is one, there crept a tiny mad idea, which the Son of God forgot to laugh. Remembered not to laugh, rather. And because we took it seriously, we made up a forgivable dream, but we don't think it's forgivable. And so the ego takes it seriously. It takes this insanity of sin, guilt, and fear seriously. And in order to hide from the horror of that thought, which is beyond our imagination, we project out that grievance that we had with creation, that upset that we thought, the impossible dream that we thought we pulled off, onto the world. And so our condemnations and attacks seem justified because we now have something to blame, or someone to blame, and we fragmented our identity into all these gazillion little pieces that we call persons and atoms and galaxies and everything in between. And then we project that out onto the world. So if you drop down from that darker blue rectangle down to underneath it to effect, we get mindlessness, form, space, time, individuality. And then because we made special things we have a special love-hate relationship or special love-hate objects in this wheel of misfortune, the un-merry-go-round of things that are constantly changing and shifting, and all the various specific things that seem to be are the things that torment us. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare would say. And those are all the things that seem to be the firefighting exercise in each moment of our life that demands attention and keeps us mindless. But there's another way to look at things. So the bottom line of ego's thing is, ego doesn't tolerate looking outside its prison walls. And the ego is constantly trying to get us out of our mind into the world and identifying with the world. So the thrust of the ego's thought system is always downward, and it's trying to push down. That's why I've got all those black arrows pointing to the little squares in this particular diagrams. Like, let's project the unconscious, unfounded guilt onto each specific thing that comes up moment to moment in our lives, onto those things, and then they become the scapegoats. And so this becomes our goatscape, if you will, of all the stuff that seems to be the cause of my upset. And then when we think we're stuck there, there's this little voice that says, lesson 5, what if I'm not upset for the reason I think? And what if it's not the world that's doing it to me? And then I can kind of reel in all these things that I projected. And so then we get this blue arrow that points to the right at the bottom there. It says sameness is important. And that arrow, which contradicts the ego's black arrow going the other direction, it says differences are important. And that's the ego's one of its defining characteristics, is saying that what my identity is made up of is all these differences, and those are big deals, and they're serious, and they're big and important. And the Holy Spirit says, no, sameness is really what's important. The fact that we're all fighting the same hard battle, and we're all in it together. So the sameness then becomes a means of seeing that the world isn't doing it to us, it's coming from us. And from that perspective, we kind of move over to that little pink rectangle, and then all the others that seem to be separate, they still may seem to be out there, but then there's the sameness that I think is kind of the initial step that lesson 5 gives us, is that we see, well, everyone's fighting the same hard battle, so we're all forgivable classmates, and the others, quote unquote, in our world are also calling for loving kindness. So forgiveness awakens us from dreams of separation. And then when we start doing that, we realize, okay, now where does that leave us? Well, now the error, if it's just error, is then correctable, because it's no longer out there, but it's also no longer in the mind, in my mind either, and in everyone's mind. So we kind of have to, in a sense, when we do that first step of forgiveness that lesson 5 suggests, we're essentially looking at the ego with the Holy Spirit and seeing that there's nothing to it. We're seeing that there's nothing really there. So over time, we learn to generalize the idea that everything that seems to be happening to me is really coming from me, and they're all my calls for loving kindness. And so the Holy Spirit just says, in its right mind, its sane mind, that error is just silly. But the ego says, no, it's not forgivable. It's a done deal. You're a goner. And the arrows in that other, the mental level, which is really where all this takes place, the physical level really isn't there. But then again, this whole dualistic level really isn't there either, because everything from that blue dot that originated in those 2 lower portions of the chart, if you will, the kind of bluish and pinkish those whole swaths, it's all made up. It's all made up. But forgiveness is the part that takes us back to that blue dot, with the little blue arrow at the very top of the mind section there, the cause section. And it does that by denying the denial of innocence. The ego denies the innocence, and that basically makes us crazy, because then we think we're guilty, and that in the insanity of thinking that we're guilty is intolerable. And so that's why it constantly keeps pushing us down into the world and wanting us to have a world of scapegoats and alibis and keep our blame thrower going. So there's another version of the chart that's hopefully helpful. Any comments or questions on that so far? Quite a lot there, but
I like the idea of the merry-go-round, and that the image of that, like you got the poles, you got them at one point, one's up, one's down. I mean, it's going around and around, a lot like the wheel of misfortune, but in this case, a merry-go-round with the different animals and vibes and the up and down, and we're totally out of control about that merry-go-round, seemingly from a form point of view. I like that image a lot.
Yeah. The unmerry-go-round is actually from Gary Renard's material that I just thought it was a nice phrase. but it's constantly shifting. And so when one thing seems to be handled in a split second, sometimes even later, then the next thing crops up. It's like now there's this thing. So it's always like a firefighting mode for the ego. But the Holy Spirit always calmly says, trust the process and know that you could see peace instead of this next thing. So I've got yet another, actually a few more. Hang in there. So let's go to the next one. And let's go to, let's see, actually, did this have the other one? No, it doesn't. Let me go back to this next one here, which is this one. Okay. So I was trying to think of how to, when we drill down into some of these specific examples, how to show, kind of like when you have a map, and I appreciate what Tim sent in the email, because it really is kind of like a map of our mind. And when we drill down into specific parts of the chart, just to keep it in context, I think it's nice to have kind of like a little, zoomed out view. Kind of like when you see a map of the United States and you see, oh, now we're in Colorado or in Florida or wherever for context, you can see a little inset that has the bigger picture. So that's what I've attempted to do in the little graphic outlined in green in the upper left in this one. So just a real simplified version of Ken's chart might be something like this, where truth is really everything above the line that doesn't change. It couldn't possibly change because it's a pure non-dual awareness that is really our real identity. And so everything below that purple line really is made up, starting with the tiny mad idea, the dream of separation, that then necessitated a decision maker, which is the dreamer, the observer, that as soon as we have identified with the ego, then we're slammed over into that insanity rectangle there. And our mind is basically, when we're in that mode, a slave of the ego, but it's a slave by choice. And the slavery is voluntary. So, and that's what keeps us in the alleged prison of the material world. So that the next level down is the physical that seems to be a prison for us. But when we kind of shift it around, if we're going counterclockwise here and around those four rectangles, Holy Spirit says, hey, if you do lesson 5 and see that you're never upset for the reason you think, then the prison becomes a classroom. And then if you see that nothing really happened in your mind as well as outside your mind, since ideas don't leave their source, then the sanity of the peace that realizes that everything's completely forgivable. Everyone else is, including the self that I think I am, because that's all made up. But it's only the tiny mad idea that basically necessitated the need for a correction, which is what the right-hand side of the chart represents. Is that seem useful, or any questions or comments on this so far? And then I started getting more complicated, but
I think that's about as simplified a chart I've ever seen. That's pretty good, actually.
okay. Okay. Well, I'm going to add a little bit more detail to it now. So I'm going to skip over to this one. So now I've said, okay, well, I've added a few things here. So the secret dream, this is inspired by the chart that's behind you, Tim. I just thought, well, let's just make a version that kind of has the dream aspects here. So the ego made up the secret dream, and that's the insanity. So we've got duality going on, and that's sin, guilt, fear, death. And that, again, is intolerable. That's once we decided that we wanted to be on our own and got that authority problem going, it was like that heavy blue arrow diagonal to the left says, okay, you're in the secret dream. And the secret dream that we never admit to ourselves, and the ego is terrified of us getting close to that, says, you are a sinful, guilty, fearful critter, home of evil, darkness, and sin, right? So how do you get out of there fast? Well, you make up a whole world. We take the tiny man idea and we turn a big bang out of it, and voila, gazillions of atoms and galaxies, and somewhere in between you got people and bugs and animals and plants and planets and all kinds of stuff. And so now we have a mindless nightmare world of warring bodies. And so, there's always something that's that's a challenging situation. There's always something to be concerned about. So this morning's little quick forgiveness lesson was discovering a little baby scorpion crawling across the cat food dish that I quickly squashed. Anyway, but we're always projecting, the things that we don't like about ourselves, that the self that we made up is then projected onto the world dream, which is the dream of separate interests. So the inner shield of oblivion is basically in that toward the center of those four quadrants there. That basically says, don't you dare look at the Holy Spirit's mind, because that will undo me as ego, or the wicked witch. Don't throw that bucket of water on me. I will melt. Don't you go near there. So that's when the ego goes from amber alert to red alert, when we get back into the mind and start looking at the sin, guilt, and fear with the Holy Spirit. But the outer shield of oblivion is where we spend most of our time, it would seem. I'll speak in for myself. That's certainly, if I look at the typical day, that most of my time is just doing that lesson 5 stuff, is realizing, okay, it's not the world doing it to me. It's just that's the outer shield of oblivion that says the world seems to be the problem. The people in my life, whether they're family members or life mates or coworkers or freeway drivers or people in the grocery store, the whole gamut of stuff, people on TV or any kind of media, whoever crosses our mind physically or mentally, they're the projection, and that's the world dream of separate interest. And if we can keep looking at that with Holy Spirit, it basically shifts us over to this waking dream of shared interest. And the mindful correction is that, the world isn't responsible for how I feel. And that is simultaneously as scary as hell to the ego, because it basically, says the outer shield of oblivion has been breached. Red alert. But then if we keep asking Holy Spirit for the next step, it says, well, you didn't commit an impossible crime because it was an impossible crime. So the Holy Spirit, it basically represents that happy dream where we go from the waking dream of seeing that the world isn't doing to us, to a happy dream that says, well, neither did we do it to ourselves. We couldn't have possibly compromised perfect oneness. We couldn't have possibly have compromised the innocence and made up a world of guilt and sin, guilt, and fear. So I also like to think of the line between the dark blue and the light blue is when the Holy Spirit looks into the ego's mind, it sees nothing. It's kind of like a one-way mirror. And, like in a department store where the managers can watch who's doing what in the store and whatnot. It's sort of like the Holy Spirit can look into the ego's mind and see that there's really nothing going on there. And that's that's what scares everyone's ego, because we don't want to get caught thinking that we made up nothing, as egos. But the ego, because it's a one-way mirror, it's just reflecting its own insanity back to itself. So the ego has no visibility whatsoever of the Holy Spirit, and in fact, it doesn't even have any Holy Spirit's ideas in its vocabulary. And there's that hermetically sealed, never the twain shall meet thing going on, because the Holy Spirit sees everything differently from the ego. But the ego just sees that this is this nightmare, and that's the secret dream. And the Holy Spirit says, well, what if it's a happy dream? Seem differently, because it's a dream of forgiveness. So, any comments or thoughts on that one? Or some questions?
Lynn found this thing today, I think it was yesterday. It fell out of her book, and it was the words from a David Byrne song from the 1980s when he was his band was called the Talking Heads.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of the probably more than any other music I know that's not specifically based on the Course, David Byrne's music, a lot of his songs, I mean, he's got to be a Course student. I mean, it's just like one can't. Anyway, he's got this song, instead of Decision Maker, he's got a song called Dream Operator. And paragraph, stanza after stanza, it's just describing that we're the dreamer of the dream, and we create whatever kind of dream we want. And he calls it a dream operator.
Oh, very cool. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Is that the name of the song, Dream Operator?
Yeah, and it's called Dream Operator. And he's got another one called The Road to Nowhere. And it's a marching song where everybody's marching nowhere.
Sounds like the Beatles' Nowhere Man. Another compliment.
Dream Operator, I realize, is almost got like a pa kind of sound to it. It's like the merry-go-round going around.
Yeah.
The dream just going around and around.
Oh, cool. Definitely will check that out. Yeah, neat. Yeah, so the dream operator really is, and again, it's that blue dot, because it's so easy to think that those four rectangles are where everything's happening, but no, it's always in the blue dot. And that's something that Ken Wapnick is so brilliant pointing out. Says the whole house of cards is just in one tiny little mad idea in that blue dot. And then once we broach the outer shield of oblivion and get to the castle keep of the inner shield of oblivion and get to the top of the tower and see there's nothing there. There never was anything there. How silly, and of course, as in glad astonishment, we'll realize that, for all this, we gave up nothing. It's like, how silly is that? But we're all working toward that, and we need to be very gentle and patient with ourselves as we go through this process, right? So here's yet another variant on the same chart. So same basic ideas, but I just put the word gravity and levity in here, and then I put lesson 5 and 34, just kind of like, so lesson 5 basically says I can take these separate interests and see that they're really shared interests when we all we really want to do is in order to find the egalitarian equality is see that we're all fighting the same hard battle, and then it becomes a classroom where we can help each other rather than a prison where it's every person for themselves and scarcity and lack. But then the shared interest thought system already is basically the first important step toward forgiveness, of seeing that I can't really afford to blame anyone else because they're in my mind, and with the Holy Spirit's help, I can forgive myself, because that feeling of levity of suddenly, aha, there wasn't anything to my own self-condemnation either, let alone the condemnation of others, that both of them were correctable errors. So just another variation on that. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, any comments or questions on those so far? And then
that looks like a merry-go-round of puppets on the screen now.
Yeah. Okay. So here's Here's another version. This is now zoomed in. So now I've got in that little map locator, what I did is I put the green box, kind of like whoever's talking in Zoom, like a little green outline in that little legend in the upper left corner. So you can see, and insanity and prison are highlighted there. So and this is really kind of where we spend most of our time as egos. And this is probably, in fact, the lower portion of that, if we're honest with ourselves. When we're not listening to Holy Spirit, we're pretty much happy, in heavy air quotes, prisoners, because we think, oh, well, the world's doing it to me, but I've got an alibi. I'm here, but it's not my fault. And that's kind of one of Ken's mantras, which is such a helpful one, that when we can catch ourselves doing that, or some variation of that, it's like, okay, I think I exist, but I can blame the world and countless variations of what's going on in the world for all my woes that I think are woes anyway. So the insanity of the ego says that not only do I believe in separation and differences and duality, but I believe that ideas leave their source. So that means the thoughts the ego has, the sin, guilt, fear thought system, now can divide to maintain the victimhood and the blame. And in the individuality and specialness then percolates down into bodies, atoms, galaxies, and that's the process of projection that we're doing all the time. And we just have to kind of notice that, and like as Ken would say, with a little inner smile on our face, and just say, oh yeah, there I go again. I must have been afraid of the love that was, outside this whole part of the chart that we're looking at, that I have to trust Holy Spirit that's going to guide me out of this prison. So another way of looking at that, again, where we spend a lot of our time, and that's why the course has such an emphasis on looking at the ego. And I thought if we had any time, we could read the dynamics of the ego and then use the chart for looking at each sentence or block at a time kind of thing. But here's another way of looking at the illusion of time. So in this particular instance, the ego's kind of three principal ideas about time. The sin becomes its way of looking at the past. The guilt becomes the present moment where the innocence is always denied. And fear is then projected into the future. And so that's the ego's use of time. And so we believe in separation, and one of the ways we do that is we made up time, which seems to have different, countless and seemingly infinite number of little slices of time, and each lifetime seems to be a little prison, if you will. And then the way that the ego maintains the craziness of that system is it says, you committed a crime. We've all committed this impossible crime, but the ego says, no, it's not impossible. It actually happened. And because of that, it skips over the present moment as a possibility for change. It says, don't go there, because that's where the innocence could happen if I question this whole process. But it jumps from sin to fear. It jumps from the past to the future and keeps us mindlessly out of the present and away from any kind of lucidity. So the fear then is just the natural consequence of a sinful past. But the underlying unexamined guilt is, if we really were to look at the guilt in each moment with Holy Spirit's help, we would say, oh yeah, there's nothing there. Right now, this moment, the Son of God is innocent, and that applies to everyone. And then that breaks that cycle, that vicious cycle of the past, demanding that the future be just as horrendous. So another variation on this would be looking at projection. And so the ego basically doesn't like us to think about being a mind. So the projection automatically tends to emphasize the physical. So in this diagram, I've tried to show that the ego is constantly trying to edge out the mind. And so the ego, so that's why that darker pink, if you will, rectangle is really where the ego wants to rivet our attention on the world. And so the ego has self-hatred for my impossible crime of separation, drives me out of my mind into an insane world of projected guilt. The ego denies the mind and obsesses about everything and everyone in the world that it blames for its lack of peace. And even though it really secretly doesn't want the peace, because it really thinks it's deserving of the imprisonment that it's made up for itself. And it's all made up. Fortunately, on the other side here, in the forgiveness classroom, Holy Spirit says, yeah, use every specific thing that seems to be an issue in the world and use that as part of your classroom, moment to moment to moment. Each specific thing becomes the perfect forgiveness lesson. And, you know, drag it out of the ego's dungeon into the light and see that that specific thing, the person that you're upset with, the letter you got in the mail or an email, or the whatever happened to something around your house, or to a friend or a family member that you don't like, or that happened in the world on the news, each one of those things becomes a perfect opportunity to forgive what never happened in truth. And that restores everyone's innocence and returns us to our right minds. So the Holy Spirit uses specifics in the dream of form only to undo the unfounded unconscious guilt by seeing everyone and everything innocent in eternity. So anyway, so you can see that the ego is constantly trying to keep us identified as a body in the physical form, whereas the Holy Spirit says, nope, 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 nope. Use all the physical stuff to get back to the mind, and then identify more and more with the mind. And so that's what the emphasis of the lopsided size of those rectangles there. So here's another another graphic that I think all coming at the same idea here. So a projection says, the differences are important. And so it shatters the intrinsic oneness. So I've got this little fractured planet here as a representation of that. But the form, everything that appears in form is different. All the faces on the Zoom screen, every person you think of, if we think of them as being different from ourselves, we're continuing that fragmentation. The Holy Spirit says, no, sameness is important. And if we work with lesson 5, if I'm never upset for the reason I think, then we automatically arrive at that idea that we're all the same, because we're all playing that silly ego game when we think that the world is upsetting us. And then we can afford to have compassion for each other, because not only are we all being hoodwinked by the same silly thought system, but everyone is in my mind. And each one of us can say that truly, because there's just one mind ultimately. Anyone hear the thunder? There's a little thunderstorm outside here in southern Arizona. Okay, and then one more graphic in this series. So I put in this one just under the physical label here on the lower left. It actually is entirely in mind. So again, the Holy Spirit wants to, as the last slide was showing, well, let me go back to that, or second to last one, is the Holy Spirit always wants us to be mindful instead of mindless. It's basically always reminding us that we're not bodies, as like the most recent workbook lessons in the calendar series we've been doing are suggesting. So we can't afford to be mindful. And when we do that, we're reminded that we're not bodies and that we're free. So yeah, that basically just reiterates that. So projection makes perception. Shared interests then bring us to the classroom of inclusive forgiveness, which includes me. And each one of us is an intrinsic part of that innocence. So and then I put over here for the decision makers is the Humpty Dumpty on the wall there that that never fell. So anyway, let's now do one last series here, and that would be this one. And I'm going to jump over to there. No, I already did this one. Or did I? Nope. 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 Here we go. Did I do that? Yeah, I think I did do all these. Okay. Well, anyway, that's plenty. So I hopefully these will be helpful, and I'll post these online when we're done. But I just thought it'd be kind of fun to make some variations on Ken's chart, and the idea that is, we could really put anything into Ken's chart and play with the words. And wait a minute, did I do the truth one? Let me one I think I missed maybe. Here we go. Yeah, this is one. This is really kind of beyond the scope of did I already do this? Does this look familiar? No? Okay. Yeah, this is basically this is beyond the scope of the course, but this is kind of what's the inspiration behind it. This is the oneness. So I just kind of made this as I kind of expanded Ken's list and a few that I thought might be helpful. So this is really our true identity, and this is the only thing that's actually real. Everything below the line, and if you look at the little legend in the upper left, where the green outline is saying this is all that this slide is about, is the truth or the heaven of our right beyond, beyond the duality of the ego mind and the Holy Spirit mind. Because the Holy Spirit, once we're done with our forgiveness classroom, it disappears because it's not needed, and so does the decision maker and the tiny mad idea, which never happened. They all just kind of wink out because they never were there. So I just made a list of things that I thought that are really the inspiration, I think, behind this. And as Ken Wapnick points out, all these things are really not what the course is about directly, because in order to get back to these, which is our real nature, we have to undo the blocks that we've put in. That's why there's so much emphasis on the, looking at the insanity and the prison that the ego has made by the dualistic thought system. So truth then would be pure non-duality, perfect oneness, perfect unity, infinite spirit. It's abstract, non-specific, undifferentiated, all-encompassing, unopposed. Other words that would fit. And again, these are all in all capitals to signify that they're attempts to try to describe a pure non-dual awareness. God, love, our Christ self, our true all-inclusive identity, mind with a capital M, will, light, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, creations, and even the plural there. We have a dualistic language, so it's really just one creation, right? And then even the idea of extension sort of implies a duality, but well, of course uses it, so why not? Total inclusion, inseparability. Truth is changeless. It's the capital R reality of heaven. Knowledge with a capital K. Eternity, non-temporal, constant, immutable. It's non-polarized, meaning there's nothing to fight against. There's nothing, just like the very opening lines in the course, nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. So this is, an example of there's nothing outside this in truth. But because we made up the dream of duality, we need to use Holy Spirit's guidance in order to get back to this at the top of the ladder. Undefinable, it's unchanged, unchanging, and unchangeable. And then so many of the course's inspiring passages, like the Forgotten Song, and there's a whole bunch of them in there that bring up feelings and inspirations that remind us that this really is our true nature. And those are helpful because they kind of show us the light at the end of the tunnel. Of course, there is no tunnel because we never left. So anyway, I think that's pretty much all I had to share in terms of the charts and stuff.
So I'm gonna, if you go back to that previous chart.
Oh, sure. Okay.
At least half those terms are some take on the phrase "not know," like describing truth in terms of what it's not.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of,
it's not duality. It's not specific. It's not changing. It's not temporal. I mean, they're all like not no words. Like, oh, well, about
Yep.
right.
Yeah. Non-spatial, non-temporal, undifferentiated. Yeah, because we just have to look at, and that's why the Course meets us where we think we're at. It basically says, we don't grok this because we've gone so far down the rabbit hole that these are inspiring, but as it reminds us, we got work to do. As long as we think we're a separate self, we need to keep locking our tractor beam onto Holy Spirit's signal and following that more and more closely. It's that inner GPS and letting that guide us back to that place in our mind where the peace that is at the top of the ladder in that sanity box is more and more consistent, and rather than just in fleeting glimpses. When peace is unshakable, then the Course says God will take the final step, and it's a happy inevitability. That was something I remember when I first read the Course a few decades ago, and I saw the word inevitable, and I thought, well, the way the Course uses the word inevitable from the Holy Spirit's perspective is really wonderful, because it totally changes the fearful connotation that the world has for that. The inevitability is that we all will return to this perfect peace, and the peace is actually just the criteria or the qualification for this experience that transcends anything we can imagine. But we get little shadows of glimpses of it now and then, which is good, because it kind of reminds us that, well, that's what we want. We want that what's beyond perfect peace. Well, I've talked quite a bit. I should let other people share whatever comes to mind, and I thought what we could do, if there's a stunned silence, we could just read one of these sections in the text. I thought the dynamics of the ego might be a good one to start with. It's on page 202 in the text, if anyone wants to read along, or if anybody has any comments or questions about any of the graphics, because I could go back to any or all of them. Oh, Darcy.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was thinking how it felt like, Pong, the old game where you have, and my ball is like constantly going back and forth and all around. It's like, and I was just wondering, it's hard to describe sort of movement in that, but is that your experience too, that you find that decision maker ball is like all over the place, like throughout the day or throughout the night or throughout the, it's really, and is there any specific significance to where you have the ball? Like you have it up near the top, like, and I was thinking like, I'm like, does that matter?
No.
Really.
Anything specific really doesn't matter. But in terms of, I was really just modeling after Ken's chart, which is kind of where he put it. Exactly. But the idea is sort of like, in fact, actually, interestingly enough, that when the blue dot in Ken's chart, he joked that they kept the original in a vault in case they ever needed it. But when I took a electronic music class in college, I remember they had it was basically did double duty. There was a recording studio where they had it had glass windows looked down into two lecture halls, large lecture halls for the music building, and they could record either or both of whatever was going on in either of those rooms. And I was thinking, well, it's kind of like with that decision maker, sort of like I can pay attention to either of those two thought systems and look down into them, kind of thing. And that's sort of like how I kind of picture Holy Spirit is guiding us to look at the prison, but don't take it seriously. And to your comment, is like, I think we're all in that ping pong mode of going back and forth between being inspired by Holy Spirit and then being, thrashed about and hurled back down to the ground, kicking and screaming by the ego, saying, no, you're not going there. You don't deserve that peace, because, its assessment of itself is less than stellar, I should say the least. But that's, we all think we're the home of evil, darkness, and sin when we listen to the ego. And that is such a, predominant thought that we need a lot of practice to let go of that, and to gradually, slowly but surely overcome that self-sabotage. So I think that's why, the emphasis on patience and gentleness is so important, because, just the more we look at our mind, the more ego says, okay, I'm going from amber alert to red alert.
Right.
Don't want to go there, because that's where all the guilt is.
Well, I like your time thing too. The time with the, the past, present, and future. And, that to me, along with forgiveness, but when I find that I am forced into being right here, right now, that seems to be like a window that is sort of like a shortcut, for a second. And the reason I see this is my mom had Alzheimer's. So I was constantly, like, every day she would reset, and she'd be like, and it was just such an amazing experience. Like, all of her pain disappeared. Like, she had back problems, the minute she got Alzheimer's, she just was like, let's go. Like, she had no memory, of the pain, and no fear of the pain in the future. And so there was no pain, and so that was like what I loved about Ken's too, about time and everything. And I like how you brought it up in that one chart. I think it wasn't in all of them. It was just in one where you had the time factor, but it was definitely in the egos box. But that was cool. But yeah, I see myself like bouncing around, and then when I find that sweet spot too of just being right here, right now, it almost seems like that moment of forgiveness, or the holy instant. It's like that, where you can kind of just say, oh, of course, because the ego's not here. When you're right here, right now, what is the ego? What is, so anyway. But I thought that was cool.
No, thanks. Yeah. And when we look at the ego without condemnation, which is what the Course suggests, we see its insanity, but we don't have to, we don't squirm and and run screaming out of the room, because we see that it's silly. I mean, that's, I think, the one-way mirror metaphor I think I found really helpful. It's like the Holy Spirit can look into the ego's mind and see that there's nothing there. Whereas the ego has no visibility whatsoever of what's in the Holy Spirit's mind, because it doesn't understand a shared identity. It doesn't understand anything but what's in it for me at everyone else's expense. And yeah.
Bruce Brickman is waving.
Oh, that's
waving more.
Thanks, Bruce.
About the, I'd like to just mention about the decision maker. And if you ever listen to some of Ken Wapnick's or watch some of Ken Wapnick's tapes, he is throwing that decision making all over the place. It's in the wrong mind, it's in the right mind. Yeah, I mean, our decision maker travels, even when we're in the wrong mind, we're making that's our decision. And so he emphasizes the decision maker, but he takes that blue dot and places it all over on the board. Boom, boom, boom. He's juggling the thing.
Exactly. So, I think that's a great point, because the blue dot is really just his symbol for where we're putting our attention, but its original place at the top in the middle of his chart, which is what I tried to convey, is like, well, that's where we can look objectively at the insanity of the ego. That's why I made that first chart with the red and the green and all the words. It's like, well, the ego is 100% insane all the time, and all of its attributes are equally crazy. They vary all over the map, like the merry-go-round. And one crazy idea seems to predominate more than another each moment, but they're all equally nuts. And when we look at it with just a gentle smile and say, oh yeah, there I go again, making a big deal out of X, Y, or Z. But illusion X, illusion Y, and illusion Z are really equally silly, as you know, there's no hierarchy of illusions, right? Yeah.
So he did that a lot. What Brickman was talking about in the unconscious mind seminar, where he really breaks down the chart. And he's taken the blue dot, the decision maker ball, which is magnetic, which is a metaphor in itself, and it's magnetized into the focus, as you were saying. It's where my focus is. So I've seen him do that, and certainly it's helpful to, if I keep in mind that it's just where my focus goes. But at other times, he said, this entire thing is happening inside the decision maker. We're not moving around at all.
Exactly.
We're just making up this stuff, and then we're focusing on it as if it's real.
Right.
And I think one of the themes of Lynn's class tomorrow is, and that's a really terrifying thing, because when we focus on something and we make it real, our reaction is terror. Like, this is going to get me. This is going to rebound on me. This is going to, the other shoe is going to drop. And so I think one of the helpful things about the chart, and certainly about the decision maker, is to remind myself, this is just this focusing on something that's made up going on inside here, and it's made up. That not only are the images made up that I've made real, but my reaction, the fear, is made up too. And I don't really even have to stop seeing the images. But when I admit that I'm choosing not just the images, but the fear too, it gets a little bit less. And the other night I was freaking out about something. I couldn't get to sleep. So I asked Jesus for help, and he was busy doing something. So the best he could do was help me realize that what I was making up, and even more importantly, the reaction I was having, was made up. Like, the whole thing was just made up. So just, relax, go to sleep. You'll wake up in the morning, you'll make up new images, worry about it tomorrow. But just for now, I don't have to worry that the worry's real, or that the images I'm worrying about are real either. So it actually helped me go to sleep at that point. But Lynn's class tomorrow is, how do we move from this dreaming of fear, whether it's the secret dream or our dream of fear in the world, how do we move out of that into a dream of peace? And what does that look like? So anyway, that's a good plug for tomorrow too.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I was thinking, that blue dot is really, the only thing where it's all going on, that the whole dream is happening there. But because our minds are so powerful, we've made up a world where we can actually identify with dream figures, the characters on the screen, or the movie theater, or the figures in the dream, or whatever metaphor you like. And we're so, able to identify with those things, we don't even consider this. What if I'm in the theater? What if I'm the dreamer, not the dream figure? Yeah, and that the whole thing below that purple line is just all made up, including the correction. But the correction is what Holy Spirit wants us to emphasize, and just see, well, I could forgive myself for making up this dream, and with emphasis on dream, because if it's a dream, then it's forgivable. If it was real, then that would be, a serious thing. That would be a big deal. But it's a non-deal, a nothing, seen properly. Right? Yeah, well, Marissa.
Just a thought came to my mind, an image of when you were putting your chart up, about the line that separates heaven and the tiny man idea is kind of like where the puppeteer holds his paraphernalia and is basically in charge of everything. The decision maker. That whole line just kind of popped into my head, like, yeah, he's running the show up there. Puppeteer.
Yep. Yeah, that's another great metaphor. Yeah, we all seem to be puppets. Bruce?
Yeah, to add to what Marissa said, and you, and him, And so basically, we're all hanging out in the decision making. That's where we're hanging out.
Mhm.
And, you know, our choice is, you know, our teacher. So who are we going to hang with in the decision making? Yeah, but although even our decision maker is made up, but until we clarify our perception into true perception, then we'll start to leave it. I just want to add that.
One make believe at a time. We don't have to do them all at once. Just take them on one at a time.
Exactly. Yeah. Each specific then becomes an opportunity to you know, drag the prison idea that seems to be reflected in form into a shared interest thought system and say, well, you know, we're all in the same boat here. We're all convinced we're dream figures, but if we're all the same in that regard, then each one is deserving of same patience and gentleness and forgiveness. And,
Chris Jansen has a whimsical look. Like he's,
Well, I was just going to start singing that song. It won't be make-believe if you believe in me. That's somebody Davis. I can't remember her first name.
is it country?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess. I'm not sure it has a classification. But just, you know, talking about make-believe and believe. If you believe in the Holy Spirit, it won't be make-believe. I guess if you believe in the ego, it actually is. So take your pick.
yeah, it's ironic that I think what you just shared, kind of, you know, from each perspective of each of the two thought systems, the other one is unbelievable. You know, the ego can't possibly believe in the Holy Spirit, but it fights against the Holy Spirit, you know, vehemently, and that's why there's the double shield of oblivion. It's like, well, first of all, you know, I can't deal with what I made up as an ego, as the sin, guilt, fear stuff, and the terror of that nightmare. So I got to make up a world, so I at least have some kind of pseudo solace to try to comfort myself with you know, something that maybe will give me a momentary relief from those horrible thoughts. But it never really works, because every time we project, we just invoke the anger, defense, guilt cycle over and over again. And then that just, it's like, well, once we start catching on to that and generalize and say, no matter what the form of that takes, it never makes us happy. And you know, that's what it seems like. It's a process that we just have to keep looking at over and over again with persistence and gentleness and patience, and just say, oh, well, there I go again. Like Darcy was saying, I'm bouncing back and forth. Yeah.
I have a question that Stephen hasn't asked yet. So you got the merry-go-round, right? And you got seeming crazy people in the merry-go-round, even crazier than normal, like almost like sociopaths or psychopaths. So what do you do with them? Like, how does that all fit in terms of any of those charts? Sociopaths and psychopaths.
Well, if we're all sociopaths and psychopaths and we generalize, but we're all dream sociopaths and psychopaths, then it's all forgivable. And then there's no order of difficulty in the sociopathness or psychopathness, right? I mean,
I'm
you
just
know,
glad you're sending out all those charts to everybody, because I think they're great. So linear. I think it just has to be one chart. What's the perfect chart? What's the perfect chart?
well, there wasn't
there's
one.
There's
Yeah.
so many charts.
Well, I think
that is a merry-go-round in itself.
Yeah, I just had fun, you know, making variations, and you could really get like Tim does frequently, like he's got on the chart behind him. You know, just take one topic and then show how the different thought systems relate to that topic. And but the chart really is an incredibly powerful tool for just looking at our minds and asking Holy Spirit for help. And,
Well, you don't realize the perfect chart is that one hanging on the wall next to Christina's head. The one she brought to Wisconsin that you wouldn't sign, Chris. She brought it there for us to sign, for God's sake.
whatever helps,
I
is
must
the
have been
perfect
taking
chart,
my
right?
nap during that time. I don't remember that chart.
Oh, Stephen had something.
Okay.
I don't remember. I don't remember if Wapnick ever talked about sociopaths and psychopaths, but he did say just the other day. I heard him say we are all paranoid schizophrenics
Mhm.
to a person.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah, and it makes sense because how could we be anything but when we believe in duality, right? Because the whole premise of duality is that there's more than one thing, and if there's more than one thing, then there's some kind of war going on. Oh, there we go. There's Christina's chart. Hey, very cool. Oh, that's fun. I don't think I've seen that one. Was that
Thank
was
you,
just in
Christina.
Wisconsin?
No, this is my new one.
Oh,
And
okay.
is it backwards? Or
No,
can
that's
you
good.
read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I just keep it there on my closet door, and I just keep adding words to it. That helps me.
I like the
you know,
waviness
see
of the.
things.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was just say I like the waviness of the veil of forgetfulness. Kind of reminds me of Toto before he pulls back the curtain, you know,
Yeah.
then get us all bunched together, right?
That's it. Exactly. It's the curtain. Yep.
Yeah. And Toto means in Toto means all encompassing in Latin. That's something I discovered when I was doing a little Wizard of Oz symbolism a while back.
I want to share something. I like the sign behind Vicky's head. War is over.
That's a great one, isn't it? Yeah, because in perfect peace, war never happens.
Yeah.
So everything that's above the line in the chart says, you know, what never happened is already over. Yeah, the dualistic dream is over. Well, how about if we just take a paragraph, or maybe, you know, see how far we go, and just think about how the chart fits. So I've got us on page 202, the dynamics of the ego. I'm just going to read the first sentence, and we can talk about where they fit on the chart. So,
Vicky had something. Bruce.
oh, sorry, did I miss one? No,
Vicky.
Vicky, please.
Hi, Bruce, I really appreciated hearing these lines. Nothing so blinding as perception of form, like my screen right now. I haven't heard that line for a while, and it's so important. And projection makes perception. Of course, that's been all the years and workshops and studying it. But the one thing that your chart helped me see, and tell me if, and maybe you even said this, that projection is the opposite, I want to say projection's opposite is forgiveness.
Yeah,
Do you think
yeah.
that's true? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Because when we forgive, we're basically undoing the projection by seeing the sameness, and the sameness is, you know, it's kind of the gateway idea to the oneness. That, you know, we can't. Oneness is really kind of like right up there in that first level above the line, you know, with all those capital words, and, you know, the truth, love, God, all that, heaven, all that stuff. But sameness we can grok, because, you know, we can kind of say, well, yeah, on the level of form, we're all really different. You know, the physical characteristics, you know, all the different ways we can classify people and things and stuff. You know, there's tremendous differences, but none of them are important in truth, because we all have the same, as Ken points out, we all have the same decision-making mind, the same blue dot. Thank you, Bruce Brickman. That we can either move to the left side of the chart and be insane, or we can move to the right side of the chart and be sane at any given moment, and we do it frequently. Yeah.
At one point when Vicky's screen was freaking out, her head was flashing back and forth like, no, like, no.
I know. And I even had a friend here who's pretty good with IT try and clean up my computer. I called Zoom and asked them if I could pay monthly payments to have better video. And they said, no, that won't help. It's your internet. So obviously with the cleanup that was done, that wasn't enough. I don't know what more to do with it.
Well, you would deprive us of a very entertaining visual effect that we've all come to love when you come on. So
Thank you so much. But so that was like a flash for me, that projection opposite is forgiveness. Like projection would be blame, right? I'm saying the world is doing this stuff to me.
Right.
And so forgiveness is its opposite. I like that. And then there's another chart you had put, ineffable spirit. And I didn't know what that meant, so I looked it up. Ineffable is too great or extreme to be expressed in words. And I think that we were talking about that a lot.
Yep.
And I really love that. So thank you for all your work you did tonight.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. I've always liked the word ineffable too, because it's basically kind of like what Plato would probably say about all the words that we've shared this evening is, words are symbols of symbols, and graphics are symbols of symbols, and they merely try to, represent an idea that really transcends anything that you could possibly, limit to a mere words and symbols. And
then the takeoff on ineffable is bad, but it's saying no to F you. Ineffable. It's the big not no.
That's true. It's the unfubar, right?
Is that kind of like analyze? Or we shouldn't go there?
That it's the ego cesspool is everywhere we look when we're in that thought system, right? So the idea is recognize the stench of that thought system and just say, I'd rather than hiring an interior decorator for this dumpster, maybe just ask Holy Spirit's help to climb out of it. So
we're not going to let you do section 5.
No?
No, go ahead. You got 15. You got
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Maybe I can get through one paragraph. Okay. All right. So for the dynamics of the ego, the first sentence is, no one can escape from illusions unless he looks at them, for not looking is the way they are protected. So, the not looking then would be the outer and inner shield of oblivion. So let me see if I can find that slide again real quick. Let's see, is it this one? Or okay. So here, not looking would be, let's listen to egos. When we're not looking, we're buying ego's propaganda that says, don't look at that secret dream. Just look at the world dream and get fixated on that. And then that becomes huge. And then the secret dream kind of shrinks, as another slide kind of tried to depict there. So the not looking is basically saying, I don't have any interest in getting back into my mind, because that's where that sin, guilt, fear stuff is. And that just, scares the crap out of me. I don't want to go there, says ego. And when we go along with that, we know that that's the only way out of the solution. The only solution is really just looking, but not looking with the ego, because the ego is going to always make it a fearful thing. But if we look with Holy Spirit, then we've got an out. Then we've got a real solution. So the second sense, there is no need to shrink from illusions, for they cannot be dangerous. Well, everything below the line is an illusion, right? Everything below that purple line is an illusion. And Holy Spirit is the smart, if you will, part of that dream that says, let's look at this craziness together and see that nothing happened. So third sense, we are ready to look more closely at the ego's thought system, because together we have the lamp that will dispel it. And since you realize you do not want it, you must be ready. So the way we realize that we do not want it is we're just not peaceful. We're not happy campers when we honestly look at what we keep projecting into the world and seeing, this really isn't cutting for me. Or to quote, I learned a while back, Dr. Phil, I guess it was, how's that working out for you? And we just have to be honest with ourselves, and, to Holy Spirit's persistent question of, how's that ego thought system working out? And then sentence 4, let us be very calm in doing this, for we are merely looking honestly for truth. Well, the calmness can't happen at all when that blue dot is moved over to the ego quadrant there, because calmness is not in the ego's vocabulary. It's always frenetic. It's always, some degree of panic. It may not be, outright stampede out of the theater panic, but it's got some uneasiness to it. But the Holy Spirit is infinitely calm and infinitely patient. The dynamics of the ego will be our lesson for a while, for we must look first at this to see beyond it, since you have made it real. Well, that's how we go beyond those outer and inner shield of oblivion with lesson 5 and 34. We see that the guilt wasn't in the world, and the whole thought system of sin, guilt, and fear isn't in the world, and neither was it in my mind either, because it's all below that purple line. It's all made up. And in particular, it's all on the left side of that chart, the craziness. But the sanity is even though the correction isn't real, at least the correction sees that the left side of the chart isn't real, right? Okay. We will undo this error quietly together and look beyond it to the truth. So that's basically, as we practice more and more and make it a consistency of habit of looking at our projections without condemnation, and just say, oh, I must have been afraid of the love that's behind that. Pretty soon we realize, well, gee, maybe I do want to see the consistent peace, the consistent loving kindness that's beyond that. And then that blue dot starts to let more cracks of light through the wall, and we start getting more glimpses of the idea that we could be peaceful all the time. And then what lies beyond that in that yellow section at the top, we don't really know, but we're drawn to it because that is that ineffable truth is what is our real identity. Yeah.
It's really hitting me that the word protected and projected are pretty much synonymous, especially like in that first sentence.
Yeah.
Not looking at the secret dream is the way the secret dream is projected out.
Mm-hmm.
Protected and projected by doing that.
Oh, that's great. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and then even in the world, I mean, well, we don't look at the possibility that I might actually not be upset for the reason I think. I don't look at that as a possibility. So the projection maintains itself. I protect it that way. I don't look at the possibility there could be something else going on. I might actually be upset for a different reason. And so I protect it by not ever looking at that possibility of there might be something else going on besides what I think is going on. I might not be upset for the reason I think. So it keeps the projection in place, but at that point, I'm not calling it a projection. So once again, it's protected by my refusal to look at the possibility it might be coming from somewhere else, besides from where I think it's coming from. Like that this out here is an actual reality that's causing me to feel a certain way. Yeah.
That's really helpful. Yeah, I as you're saying that, Tim, I was thinking the protection is kind of like that's the first step that in the undoing process is saying, well, what if I'm not right? Could I be happy and not right? Would I rather be happy or right? And so, well,
and Ken's last seminar, ironically, was protecting our
projections. Yeah.
The way we do that without admitting it.
Yeah. Just the willingness to question and say, what if I'm, what if I'm all messed up here? That's listening to ego.
Vicky's got something.
Oh, Vicky, yeah.
And I was wondering if the secret dream is the love of my body individuality, loving my body individuality. I don't want to look at that might be a problem, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Very much. Yeah. I didn't put individuality on there, but it certainly fits in with the whole idea. Of course, the individuality has the word duality in it, so I could have just put individ dash duality.
Well, and also divide.
Yeah,
kind of.
exactly. Yeah, it's right. Exactly. It's a fragmentation. Yeah, there's a phrase that I've been really finding helpful in the course that says, you know, we carve our individuality, I'm going to paraphrase, out of unity. You know, we take something that's intrinsically inseparable and undifferentiable, and then we say, well, let's take a little chunk out of this ocean and make a drop, you know, even though it's impossible to do that in truth. So the metaphor of a drop out of the ocean isn't quite perfect, but it'd be like an ocean that couldn't possibly be split into droplets, and that's our real identity. Yeah. So we got time for one more paragraph. Okay, paragraph 2. What is healing but the removal of all that stands in the way of knowledge? Well, knowledge would be again above the line in that chart. There's truth, heaven, knowledge, in that the pale yellow section there in this particular graphic, and you could make it any color you want, any font, any whatever. Just it's the graphic's not important, but it's the idea behind it. And then standing in the way of knowledge, well, we have to go through that gatekeeper, the blue dot, and the only way we get back to that blue dot is by listening to Jesus, Holy Spirit, and saying, well, what if I challenged every ego assumption? What if I question every value that ego holds? Or like you were saying, Vicky, what if I question the very premise of my individuality being a big deal and important, in favor of my real identity that we all share being the real big deal, but not big in a comparative sense, big in an absolute sense, as an all-encompassing, right? Yeah.
Do you remember the gatekeeper in Ghostbusters? It was like a monster.
Vaguely,
I kind of think, well, at least in terms of the chart, everybody, I mean, on a good-ego day, we think the decision maker is a monster. And it took over Rick Moranis's body.
Right. Yes, now I remember. Yeah.
It's a hysterical scene. But anyway, the gatekeeper was a monster that protected all that other stuff going on.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, like you say, you know, the ego projects, you know, all of its unconscious craziness onto anything that's vaguely related to the right side of the chart. So that's why the ego's lowercase g God is a vengeful, wrathful, fearful, you know, deity that reigns its terror, but in an indiscriminate and unpredictable way, because, you know, some days it might be, you know, sort of okay, let things slide, and then other days, you know, the Monty Python foot descends from the sky and
Bruce Brakeman's got something.
Oh, thanks.
I think too, the secret dream is that place where I have that secret wish to exist. I want to exist.
Mm-hmm.
In that secret wish to exist, in which makes me capable of needing the device called the ego. And in that secret wish, that's where I have to go to look, to understand why I don't exist here. Is through the secret wish that I want to exist.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. It's I notice that whenever I want to make a big deal out of, you know, what's in it for Bruce kind of thing, and just you know, pay attention to that that ugly, selfish part of the identity that the ego made up. And when I can look at that without condemning myself and just say, well, it's made up, then I can begin to question it. But as long as it's real, if I make it real, you know, I don't want to question that.
Yeah. And in that secret wish, we make it real by, you know, seeing other people, making judgments about other people.
Mhm.
That is where our secret wish exists for us to exist. And that's our proof. What we see outside of us. That's our proof that our secret wish is. So we have to look at that in a different perspective with the Holy Spirit.
I don't want to put Betsy on the spot, but Betsy, do you have a favorite chart here?
Thanks for putting me on the spot. No, you know, which chart, so all of these, I've been sitting here thinking, I feel like I'm in my high school chemistry or physics class. It's like, because I never really quite understood exactly what everybody else was talking about. I knew I was going to have to work really hard to try and, you know, catch up. But I like what you've done. But, you know, the chart that has really struck me was the one of truth, because that's who we are.
Mhm.
And I don't, like, that's really hard to believe for me.
We're all in the same remedial classroom. We're all finding it a tough thing to believe, because our minds are so powerful, and we've convinced ourselves that we're something we're not. We've said, I don't want to be the ocean. I want to be this little drop, and I want to make that the big deal. And the ocean said, yeah, not going to happen. In fact, the ocean doesn't say anything because it didn't happen. And if the ocean did say something in response to the tiny mad eddy, then we'd all be sunk in a ego's non-existent ocean.
And, you know, a nice reminder about the process is I don't have to jump right to truth.
Right.
I don't have to go around beating my chest saying I'm a non-dual being. Like, how well does that work? I mean, I start with, maybe you're not the jerk I think you are. Maybe you're not the problem. I can start with something real basic and simple like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I think the course really emphasizes that lower left, those two lower left quadrants, is like, you know, this is our classroom. We need to look at the ego for a while here, the dynamics of the ego, just see how that projection keeps going until we question it, question every value, and say, what if the value that I'm putting on my identity as a little silly, seemingly separate self is causing me all this pain? And if I just look at it moment to moment to moment and see that that isn't working out for me, I could, you know, with Holy Spirit's help, escape from this. On my own, it's not going to happen, but with Holy Spirit's help, I can, and I will do this. That's the happy inevitability again. Well, how about, since we've already kind of run out of time, I thought it maybe just read today's lesson as a closing. So if anybody wants to just relax and close your eyes, I'll just read this quickly, and we can use the function of forgiveness, which is the undoing of the projection, as our little going forward meditation here. So lesson 212 is, I am not a body, I am free, for I'm still as God created me. I have a function God would have me fill. I seek the function that would set me free from all the vain illusions of the world. Only the function God has given me can offer me freedom. Only this I seek, and only this will I accept as mine. I am not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bruce. That was probably the most thorough chart job I've ever seen. That was good.
Nice,
Agreed. That
nice
was
chart job.
fantastic.
Thank you, Bruce. This was great.
Thanks all.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a-
Bruce.
Thank
Great
you.
evening.
Great,
Last
Bruce.
charts
Thank you so
alive. Wow.
much.
Loved it. Good class.
Great,
Be good.
Bruce.
I still like
Good job.
I still like Christina's chart.
I want to see it. Can you send can you send it
I
around,
never
Christina?
hung it up for it in Wisconsin, so I'm plagued with guilt.
Oh, hey.
Send it out, Christina, send it out.
Yes, please.
Oh, well, I guess I'll have to take a photo, huh?
You will.
Yeah, a
Yes,
photo.
you
All
You
right.
can do it, you can do it.
Yeah, you can do it.
It's fun to see
You're
everyone's chart
five,
because
you can do this.
each one has a different thing and everyone gets something from it, you know, they're all
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah. It's fun
Yep.
to do them, I agree. It really helps get the concept in, and I, like I say, I can look at it every day.
Just wait till Sakina does a chart.
Uh-oh.
And it's not the product, it's the process, right? Because the
Uh-huh,
process
it's-
is what reminds us, it's like, well, there's something to this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is.
Oh,
It's the
bless you.
process.
Thank you.
Have a good night, y'all.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.
Nice-
Hi, everybody.
Nice to see everybody.
Don't go, don't go.